Welcome back. In our next segment, we are going to highlight 3 programs with a focus on intergenerational program design and engagement in the Jewish community. And for a little context, as we delve into the topic of intergenerational programs, it's important to note how much the United States has changed over time when it comes to age diversity. In the early 20th century, the US was one of the most age-integrated societies in the world. Thanks to important social innovations such as schooling, nursing homes, we are now one of the most age-segregated societies in the world. We also now live in a time of unprecedented age diversity in the US. We have more generations living at the same time than ever before, yet our lives rarely intersect. And this artificial separation comes at a great cost, as we know, to all generations, young and old. The next 3 program models seek to address this fundamental challenge in innovative ways. We will start by hearing from David Rayfield, CEO and co-founder of the Jewish Grandparents Network. Welcome, David, and thanks for speaking now.
Thank you so much. Just before I begin, I'm going to put some links to our website and resources in our website in the chat room. Just a quick shout out to a wonderful community leader, Eileen Vogelstein, who's joining us, who is the incoming president of the Jewish Grandparents Network, and my extraordinary professional partner, Terry Kay, who is responsible for most of the good things that we do. This is a brief history of the brief history because we're a relatively new organization. So let's start here. The Jewish Grandparents Network engages, educates, celebrates grandparents as an essential influence in Jewish family life. We know, for instance, based on data, that by age 65, about 96% of Americans are grandparents. We also know that 45% of grandparents, or that 45% of all giving to nonprofit organization comes from grandparents, and that in the next 20 years, about $70 trillion will be handed down from this generation to the next, with $61 trillion of that going to their heirs and about $9 trillion going to charities. So this is a very important constituency. Next slide, please. So I'm very briefly going to go through our history, which is very brief. I wrote Inspiration and Angst as our initial starting point. We'll talk about that in a minute. Research and advocacy, innovation, community development, and then sustainability. Thinking about sustainability of our organization. Next slide, please. So the Jewish Grandparents Network began in a conversation in Lee Hendler's backyard. Lee was our co-founder and our first president. And it began with Lee's concern that the Jewish community was really not engaging, supporting, and involving grandparents as essential transmitters of our Jewish values and supporters of today's family. Next slide. And so we started talking to people and speaking to prospective supporters and foundations. And as in the case in many of our organizations, nobody seemed to be listening. There seemed to be a matter of ageism. There seemed to be a kind of a very significant focus on young adults in our community. And as Lee Henley used to say, well, if you want to talk to young adults, talk to me because I got 5 of them in my cell phone. Next slide, please. So we decided that the way for us to start is to begin to gather some data. And we conducted the first national study of Jewish grandparents. Next slide. It was the first large-scale study. We wanted to develop data that could be projectable and accurate to the Jewish grandparent population in America. We gathered data on demographics, behaviors, attitudes, and aspirations, and it was conducted from November 5th to December 4th. We did a outreach, a representative, a random sample of over 1,000, and over close to 7,000 grandparents volunteered to participate in an outreach sample. And they were self-selected, so we have a sense of the difference between the random cohort and those folks who self-selected to participate. Next slide. So some key demographic points. And these demographic data points speak of the essential role that grandparents play in today's families. So we know that grandparents play very significant roles in supporting their adult children and their grandchildren. They're playing the roles as childcare providers. They see them frequently, and about 75% of grandparents have done stuff with their grandchildren in their home or in their grandkids' home at about 65%. And what we learned from that is that if we want to engage grandparents with their grandkids, the home was the place to do it. And it made us think about how we could encourage organizations to think beyond their walls and begin to connect folks, the intergenerational families at home. Next slide, please. Some of the key Jewish data points were that it is very important across the board for grandparents to transmit Jewish values, to teach their grandkids about heritage, and for their grandkids to have a strong connection to Judaism. We'll learn in a minute that not all grandparents feel comfortable or feel that they have the resources to do so. But we also learned that in the past year, grandparents had not participated in the following with their grandkids. They had not attended a synagogue with their grandkids at 74%. 69% had not celebrated Shabbat with their grandkids, and 87% had not attended to the JCC. And what we learned from that is that if we're going to engage grandparents, today's longstanding organizations really need to rethink what it means to connect with grandparents and their grandkids. And again, as I like to say, think outside of the sanctuary or think outside of the gym. We also know that 53% of grandparents have at least one grandkid who's being raised in a household where one of the parents does not identify as Jewish. 20% of them, by the way, are being raised solely Jewish, and another, I believe it's 17% are being raised Jewish in another faith. Next slide, please. So part of what we did is the segmentation analysis, where we used 31 questions and an algorithm to identify 5 different cohorts of the grandparent community. And these are the 5 cohorts: joyful, faithful, secular, wistful, and detached. And you can learn more about them using the link to our national study on in the chat box. What that enabled us to do is to share with organizations a better understanding of who their community was and what might be the ways to engage them based on their profiles. Next slide. Additionally, we did focus groups. We've had about 100 grandparents participate in focus groups. We did interviews. We did a smaller study of grandparenting during COVID, which we identified the essential roles that grandparents played in support of their families during COVID. We've used these findings to guide our strategies. Basically, everything we do is built on the findings. We use them to advocate on behalf of grandparents in organizations across the country, and we provide support and guidance to Jewish grandparents and Jewish organizations to better understand their Jewish communities and figure out how to engage them. We've presented about 100 times in the last 3 years. Next slide, please. So the next area of development was based on a major grant we got from a foundation, was to begin to create content. To begin create opportunities to innovate and new ways to engage grandparents and their families. And I invite you to go to our website, and the link is there, and visit our family room, which again, magnificently created by my colleague, Terry Kay. Next slide, please. So in the family room, we have 9 destinations: the arts, celebrations and holidays, cooking and food. You could read them all, with close to 100 resources and activities for grandparents and their grandkids. Anything from how to take pictures with your grandkids, how to do composting with your grandkids, dancing with your grandkids, how to travel with your teens. We have one that I love on how to FaceTime with a 6-month-old. In order to get this out to the community, we've been doing B2C, a business to customer, that folks who are visiting our website, but additionally, we have offered access to our website to any organization that would like to place it on on their website. And we do that at no cost to the organizations because our goal is to get it out there. In advancing on this, we do monthly webinars called Family Room Live. We are now working in partnership with the Jewish Educational Project of New York to create lesson plans based on the activities in the family room. And additionally, we have engaged a Jewish educator to link Jewish values to each one of these activities. Next slide. Some of our new initiatives, we received a Covenant grant to explore the grandparent-grandchild relationship at different life stages. And our first one that we've been working on is how to connect grandparents and grandkids during the B'nai Mitzvah years, how to elevate both the rituals and at the same time think about what happens before and after. We are now looking to kind of create a broad Jewish learning and discovery framework that will guide all of our activities. We are planning a virtual grandparents mini university in the fall. We are going to be creating a website for organizations and professionals to share resources and to learn from one another. And we're exploring the opportunity of creating some kind of Jewish heritage game for grandparents and their families. Next slide, please. The next phase in our development is community development. Next slide. So we are doing two broad spheres of things. In the short term, we plan on creating community-based initiatives, which essentially means to create boots on the ground, professionals that will work in communities and work in partnership with organizations to create multi-generational activities where organizations are collaborating with one another. We will also be sharing our resources and providing funding for those kind of initiatives. In the midterm, we hope to be holding conferences and multi-generational and skip-gen retreats. Our long-term thinking is to create opportunities for grandparent-grandchild travel. Finally, we are building our social media site. We are looking to create support and affinity groups for grandparents who are sharing common concerns. And finally, we're looking to create some kind of scalable model of shared learning for grandparents. Next slide. So finally, part of what we think a lot about is what can the rest of the world learn from grandparents? And we know when we look at the grandparent-grandchild relationship, there are 5 different qualities that we've identified. One is the shared exploration. In Jewish terms, we call that chavruta learning. There is a joy and playfulness in the relationship. We know that learning in the grandparent-grandchild relationship can happen anytime and anywhere. We know that grandparents share their stories and their future dreams. And finally, we know that the relationship was filled with a sense of wonder. And part of what we've been thinking about is how those elements of the grandparent-grandchild relationship can be shared with the rest of our community to elevate Jewish learning and Jewish discovery. Thank you.
Thank you, David, so much. Just beautiful and so powerful, what is shared with grandparents and their grandchildren. So more to come from David. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next guest. We're going to hear from Julia Pollack, the Director of the Volunteer Leadership at Combined Jewish Philanthropies in Boston. Julia joins us to share about CJP's Intergenerational Leadership Learning Circles. Thank you and welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much. I feel very honored to be here. This is a remarkable opportunity. So thank you for having me. And I hope this provides a great look into a different approach where we can explore intergenerational programming that's not actually even based within the family, but creating new relationships, because I think that's just a different model that isn't always top of mind, but a great and important opportunity to build relationships. So a little bit about me for 2 seconds. I hope that I oversee all of our leadership cohort programming, and the learning circles are just one of a variety of ways in which we engage on leadership learning at CJP. It's a very, very new opportunity for us. We piloted these learning circles in 2020 2020 to 2021. It feels just not that long ago, but time is moving quickly. And this was really an opportunity to dig into small cohort learning. And for those who do cohort work, that can range in size all around, but these were truly 8 people with groups of 8 to 12 people that were peer facilitated. So as small can be, very comfortable on a screen. All of this was virtual, and really engaging in ongoing leadership learning that took a little bit more of actually an academic approach to all of it. So we provided our groups with pre-reads of HBS articles or similar academic articles, and pre-watches of different TED Talks as well on 3 key themes throughout the program. It was empowering and motivating a team, moving a compelling vision forward, and understanding and embracing having influence without authority. And so all of those topics were spaces that you could think about from a lay leadership perspective, as well as a professional perspective, and even a personal perspective. We ran these cohorts twice in that first fiscal year in 2020, 2021. In the fall, we really chose the opportunity to kind of keep the questions open, dig into the academic resources we provided, and ask the participants to show up with their personal challenges, their professional challenges, and really engage with one another. In the spring, I think we realized as a federation, this was a missed opportunity to not dig into some CJP challenges. And so we kind of swung the pendulum in a totally different direction and brought in our professional executive leadership to take those themes, so still holding on to those 3 buckets I shared, but use that as a launch point for key questions and strategic questions that CJP is grappling with within those themes. And so we were giving people the opportunity to not just see the curtain pulled back, but actually engage in the work in a space where they might not have had the opportunity to, whether they weren't sitting on a committee or there wasn't a committee in existence. They were actually able to provide lifetime input. And then we ultimately reported back on where the things went, so that they actually felt like whether or not we took their opinion to growth, they still weighed in, and we wanted to kind of follow that narrative. So where did this all come from? I heard in the previous session, people talking a lot about letting these opportunities grow from our lay leadership. And this in particular was one, sorry, city living, I apologize. So this idea came from 2 of our remarkable lay leaders who approached CJP actually before the pandemic in late 2019, said they had this idea they were grappling with these issues themselves, reading these articles, trying to think about it with one another. And wouldn't it be great if we created these intergenerational learning spaces for people to engage in this? At the time, we didn't have much more than the administrative support to give them. We said, sure, but go for it. And the pandemic paused everything. My role shifted to be able to do this work, and I was able to help them come late fall of 2020 to really launch these programs. What I think is beyond the kind of intergenerational, that key component, the other key to this success was that this was a low time commitment, high impact opportunity. We so often do low time commitment, low-ish impact, and those tend to be events where they're really important, but it's sort of you get what you give, and it's one night or one afternoon. And then we do high time commitment, high impact, most of my other programming, which runs for a year-long opportunity, and you really have to commit. This was 3 to 4 sessions, and we dug deep. And that was a really unique space where the leaders who were leading the charge and working with me really felt this was important. When we looked at the invitees, in order to really bring the right people in the room, this was a mixture of people across all different experience levels with CJP, but really everybody had expressed an interest in growing as a leader at whatever point they were. And so these were often, it served as a bridge between whether roles with the organization or other community partners, or between programs, or in a life stage where they were finally able to give back. I'm going to talk a little bit in a few seconds, I promise, about kind of how we're engaging the empty nester baby boomer space in this work, because they have the time and they have the desire to give back and share what they know and learn from others in a space where they don't usually get to connect with that other generation. And we also reached out to our core partners and their CEOs and said, who's also rising in your community organizations that should be participating in this in order to diversify the voices. So I'm trying to go fast. I have not timed myself, so I apologize. So great things that we got out of this was small group learning is the way to go. We have found locally, small group opportunities really are about deepening relationships. And that's what allowed people to be vulnerable across the intergenerational components of these groups. I'd also note that we did not curate these groups at all. People picked truly based on their logistical calendars, and we lucked out. I wish I could say we curated them to have been as successful as they were, hoping to figure out the magic when we do it again, but people picked it based on what they were able to do, and thus I think they showed up with their whole selves and the commitment that they were giving to this program. I think one of the biggest learnings that we got was that we filled way too much in a very tight time frame. Each session was an hour and a half long, and we tried to do a lot. And so finding that balance between giving people as much as possible and making them leave with wanting more and not overwhelming them is really important. However, I think that also led to people connecting with one another outside of the groups to continue the conversations. And those were kind of the heart of that intergenerational piece. I'm going to quickly just note that, as I said, the baby boomer piece, I have a colleague who's really working with that group on international travel, and she and I have been focusing a lot on the handoff opportunities between the people she's sending on trips, and then this being a really meaningful next step. They have the time, they're interested, they don't just necessarily want to connect with their own kids as the next generation, they want to know what else is out there, and they're open to learning and engaging as much as they want to teach. And so that was really special. And the only other place we're really doing this at CJP is actually around putting them in roles and committees and boards across the organization and the community. We're not doing other programming. However, I think this is really important because getting to kind of test and practice and engaging in that space is crucial to be able to serve successfully. So I'm going to pause. I'm sure there's questions, so I apologize if I went over.
Beautiful, Julia. Thank you so much. And just love that sense of inquiry, right? That rich teaching and learning intergenerationally that everyone is leaning into, that you described so beautifully. So thank you so much. Okay, finally, we're going to hear from David Goodman, past president of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey and co-founder of Cleanup Crew, an intergenerational volunteer group that has made 23 trips to New Orleans in the coastal region since Hurricane Katrina. David, welcome. And after David, we will go into our Q&A with these three wonderful speakers. Thanks, David.
Thank you, and hi, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon, or this morning, I guess, if you're on the West Coast, and share with you a little bit about something regarding intergenerational volunteering that we stumbled across by accident. Here's a picture of one of our groups that traveled to New Orleans. As I mentioned in the introduction, it's been 23 times. So the cleanup crew came out of a frustration of me watching the lack of response to Hurricane Katrina. I have a connection to New Orleans. I am a Tulane graduate, and a friend of mine actually lived and worked in New Orleans for a few years. The two of us were very much frustrated about the lack of response and felt that we needed to give back to a community that had given to us when we were living there. We engaged with our local federation and didn't want to have we'll call it the Larry and David Most Excellent Adventure to New Orleans. We needed some credibility. And so Larry and I reached out to the federation through a leadership program that we were in, and found a federation professional who would support us on this. And you might know him as Stu Himmelfarb, but Stu was able to allow us to get the backing of our federation. And we did not really want to use federation resources to respond to New Orleans. And so all of our volunteers came and paid their own expenses. We spent 3 days in New Orleans, and that was the model for our trip, working on helping to rebuild the community. Initially, we focused on the Jewish community, and discovered after a few trips that that Jewish community had basically been rebuilt to the point where their needs were being met. Thank goodness for all of the funds that came in from around the country through JFNA. And we started to just work in the greater community. Now, after a few trips, by accident, I think there were a group of moms who invited their seniors in high school, or just about to go off to college, children to join them. And we observed, Stu and Larry and I, that there was a lot of really engaging activity going on between the parents. And after our trip, the feedback that we got from these parents and even from the kids about working with their parents and engaging in volunteering together was really powerful. And from our perspective, this was something really special that we had created. And we began to encourage other people to join us and to bring their kids. We worked with the organizations in New Orleans that were providing volunteer programs with us to allow kids who were of bar and bat mitzvah age to join us. And it just became a very special way for people to engage these memories. And last night I was actually at a Federation event and ran into one of those original moms and talked to her about the experience she had. She had brought her oldest daughter on, I think it was our fourth or fifth trip with a group of friends. She wound up actually, after doing that, taking her two other children on volunteer trips, one to Houston, and I believe the other one was to New Orleans. But it was through what we had created that people began to engage the other generation. And we figured we've, through 23 trips, probably brought over 400 people to New Orleans. And we have plans now to create our 24th trip this fall. And I will be bringing my youngest child with me, who's the last of my group, to be able to experience volunteering with their father in New Orleans. So, that's really what I wanted to share with you, is how we saw this engagement create a kind of like an ongoing future of volunteering and connecting with the next generation. So I hope that I've made up for a lot of the time that everybody else took extra. But I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the Q&A part, if you're interested in finding out more.
Beautiful, David, and we appreciate that. And we look forward to hearing about that trip with your daughter. Love that idea of just the shared values. Parents modeling what they love for their children and bringing them into that is really so powerful. So thank you. Welcome back. We have our two Davids and Julia, and this is again our opportunity to hear from our participants. Please ask questions. I'm looking at the chat now. First question, Joy, is there a website for the cleanup crew, David G?
We have a Facebook page, and I will share the link to our Facebook page. Because of COVID, we haven't really updated very much, but you'll find videos and pictures and news stories, and we try and keep the group connected. So when something happens regarding an organization we've worked with, we've added that information on the Facebook page. So I'll share that link in a little bit.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, another question from Michael regarding Jewish Grandparents Network. David would you mind talking a bit about Jewish grandfamilies, that is, households headed by older adults, grandparents, or others? Do you have data about how many, what they look like?
We don't actually, but we may have data, but it's probably not significant in terms of the number of responses for it to be valid in terms of projecting it. We do know that it's a growing phenomenon. We do know that there are two things happening. One is that grandparents assuming responsibility for raising their grandkids, but we're seeing, especially after COVID, more and more families sharing houses. So we have intergenerational houses that are happening as well. But unfortunately, we don't have really good data on it, and it's a wonderful question.
Yes, it is. And we will follow up, and David, you can also read the follow up there in the chat from that person. But let me pose a question to all of you, which is, and maybe we'll start, Julia, you can start by kicking us off. When you're designing, running the programs, granted it's a pilot in your case, Julia, what elements or learnings ended up surprising you? What were perhaps either unintended consequences or surprises when you think about the program?
That's a great question. I think that truly just the impact and the level of conversation across each group. We had 3 groups in the fall. We had 7 groups in the fall, and 3, I think, in the spring. And they were just the amount of respect and depth of conversation across generations was really impressive. I knew we picked very smart people to be in the room, so that wasn't surprising, but how open everybody was to other perspectives was really incredibly special and inspiring. And I would say also at the time, I thought that fall of 2020 felt like a very long time since March of 2020. And so I thought people were kind of zoomed out and really kind of done with it. And the amount that people were really able to connect with one another on a virtual screen and having never met one another was also really very special.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you.
David? I'm happy to respond, but David, you want to go?
You can go first.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that were surprising to us, but one thing that we've been addressing that I think is worthwhile for the community to think about is, I'm a Salma Schechter kid, a Camp Vermont kid, and I just thought how easy it must be for grandparents to share their Jewish values, traditions, and customs, but it's not. It's really a complicated dynamic. In the context of 53% of grandkids being raised in multi-faith households, and grandparents not only always having the background and resources to feel a sense of confidence in sharing Jewish values, resources, and traditions, I think it's a complex dynamic for us to think about, and for the Jewish community collectively to kind of think about how do we empower grandparents and others to share Jewish values, customs, and traditions in a complex intergenerational dynamic.
Yeah, beautiful, rich question, David.
We wonder how we would have been able to do this under different economic circumstances, for sure, to be able to, get people not to have to contribute to participating. How do we create opportunities for people to do this without having to lay out significant amounts of money? It's not cheap, and we didn't stay at the Ritz-Carlton, but we had to have bus drivers, we had to rent cars, we had to pay for meals and arrange those meals. The good thing about it is that we became so well known and popular because of the work we were able to accomplish during our trips that we didn't have to pay a fee, because I know there's a discussion about the entry fee to volunteering, and those were waived for our group, but still people had a lot of expenses. They also had to take a time off from work, from school, so we definitely had limitations in terms of getting people to have access to these opportunities. But we are lucky enough that we are in one of the wealthiest areas in the country with a very significant Jewish population, that it made it easier for us to be able to accomplish what we were trying to accomplish. And again, just having the whole intergenerational part of this is happening by accident.
Yeah, thank you for that. David Rayfield, what do you see when you think about the research study, when you think about the network, what do you see as the potential for intergenerational program design in the Jewish community going forward, based on the research you're learning, based on the complexities you're naming?
Well, I would probably have to find it. The quote from David Elkott, who speaks about the kind of grandparents as a great unutilized resource in the Jewish community. Also, the quote, I don't remember who it's from, but it's, we think grandparents are the great the hidden secret, or the hidden resource in the community. I think a couple of things has to happen. I think one of the things that we've been working on is to help organizations create links to the home environment. So, we need organizations to move beyond their walls and be able to say, okay, what's our role in partnering and supporting with intergenerational family at home to build on what we're trying to accomplish? One of the things that we've been working on is creating lesson plans so that the activities that we create at home can take place in the classroom as well. I think there's enormous opportunity to empower grandparents, but I think at the same time, a couple of things need to happen. We need to be far more creative in how we think about what it means to be engaged Jewishly. If being engaged Jewishly means taking your grandkids to, Shacharit and Musaf on Shabbos, it's not going to happen. But if being engaged Jewishly means taking your grandparents and grandkids on a mindful walk on Shabbat afternoon, well, maybe that's something that could happen. So I think the opportunities are terrific if we could move beyond our organizational mindset and our traditional approaches of what it means to be engaged in Jewish life. The best part of Rosh Hashanah is probably not going to shul. The best part with grandkids is probably Tashlich. And how do we wrap around that and make that an activity of meaning that grandparents and grandkids can do together?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm looking, we have just a couple of more minutes. I'm looking at Rabbi Geller's comment in the chat. The idea of intergenerational home sharing is another idea worth exploring. To see David nodding on that one, especially for solo agers who want to age in place. I share my home with 2 Hebrew Union College rabbinical students. It's been wonderful, and for them as well. There's websites that help make those matching. Vetting both the younger folks and the older might be an interesting idea for the Jewish community to explore in a more robust way. Julia, I'm going to turn to you for our last question. We have 2 minutes left, which is there anything, when you think about young and old lay leaders and pros involved in intergenerational program design, what do you see as some benefits coming out of the pilot experience?
I think that it's a win-win-win-win. I mean, there's no end to the win, I would say. Everybody grows from everyone's experiences. The organizations gain tremendous insight and opportunity because we've only strengthened the pipeline. We've given younger leaders the chance to look to what their future can be and provide mentors and guidance in a very informal but meaningful way. And we've provided older leaders the chance to kind of feel the trust that the community is going to be in great hands, pass along their experience, and continue to grow, and not just sort of stop with where they are because they've peaked in any one way, but they're able to continue to grow and evolve based on what they're learning from younger leaders as well. And so I just think that there's just an endless benefit to strengthening that pipeline and ensuring that there's going to be a strong, vibrant future because the legacy will have passed on along with current knowledge growing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julia, David Rayfield, David Goodman. So